Our story continues. There was no disagreement when Odyssean decided that the party could not stay where it had been camped. Cerinthia wanted to at least gather the bodies of the peace warders for some sort of respectful burial, but Odyssean cared nothing for the corpses. These men had intended capture for him and death for his companions, and so he felt justified in leaving them out in the open to be feasted upon by the carrion eaters of the forest. They searched for the peace warders' horses, but even the sharp-eyed Achilleos could find no trace, so they quickly gave up and mounted their own as they raced off into the dead of night. Odyssean remained tense throughout the ride, not because he feared for himself so much, but for the others, especially Lilia. He worried that Malik would take note of the closeness that she had shared with him, more so than the blood ties of him and his brother. Thinking of Mendeln, Odyssean glanced back at his sibling's shadowed form. He appeared particularly affected by the carnage, even more so than Cerinthia. Odyssean had caught him standing near one body after another, shaking his head, reaching out into the darkness. The shock of the incident clearly continued to haunt Mendeln even now. With a grunt, Odyssean returned his gaze to the black path ahead. Perhaps it would have been better to leave Mendeln somewhere along the way. He wished no harm to come to his brother, nor did he want Mendeln's fragile state to cause any difficulty for him later on. Odyssean had always known his brother was not as strong physically, but he believed that Mendeln had a sturdy mind. Evidently, he had been wrong. He took another glance over his shoulder. Yes, Mendeln looked like a man haunted. Something would have to be done if that did not change. Faster and faster they rode. Mendeln tried desperately to stare only ahead, but even in that direction he could not entirely escape them. There were 5, he, his brother, and the rest. But with the 5 there now traveled nearly a score more riders that only Mendeln could apparently see. The translucent wisps of white and gray fluttered along each side of the party. They shimmered in and out of existence. They had gaunt, pale faces and wore the helmets and breastplates of peace warders. When he did glance in their direction, it was only to be rewarded by the same unblinking, hollow-eyed stares, as if they awaited some word from him. But he had no words for the ghosts of men slain by his brother and Achilleos, save for his silent pleas for them to depart. Yet not only did they not leave, they seemed to cluster nearest to him. They seemed to keep perfect pace with the anguished farmer, riding astride invisible mounts. He supposed that if any animals had been killed in the process, that they too would join in his ghostly charge. That notion made Mendeln chuckle nervously, which brought about the concerned glance from Achilleos. He thought of telling the archer what was happening. Achilleos perhaps was the only one who might understand. The hunter would recall the unsettling stone and would make that connection, just as Mendeln had. But if Achilleos had any good sense, then he assumed the archer would keep his distance from the hapless farmer. Mendeln certainly would not blame him. He wanted to be as far away from himself as possible. However, since that wasn't possible for him to do that, he hoped that with time the shades would go to whatever rest they were supposed to. Yes, he could hope for that, but Mendeln doubted he would be so lucky. As night gave way to a mist-covered day, Achilleos suggested that they stop, but Odyssean chose to press the horses and his companions until what he believed to be nearly noon. Only when they came across a stream surrounded by high, canopied trees did he finally call a halt. Even Odyssean felt weary as he helped Lilia dismount while Achilleos did the same for Cerinthia. Mendeln slipped off his own mount and rushed to the stream for a drink. However, barely had Odyssean's brother started to thrust his hand toward the clear water when suddenly he withdrew it as if bitten. The younger son of Diomedes stared off into the distance, then blinking, looked back at the rest.
"This water is tainted,"
he said somewhat hesitantly.
"Best not to drink it. At the very least, we would become very ill."
"How do you know?"
asked Cerinthia. Mendeln frowned, acting to Odyssean like a child caught in a lie.
I saw some small fish, more than one, float by. They were dead and mottled. Looked like they died of sickness." "I've seen the like,"
interjected Achilleos.
"If what Mendeln describes is accurate, then we'd be best not to drink it."
"But there is nothing to fear,"
declared Lilia, stepping from Odyssean's side.
"You can surely deal with something so simple as this."
"Deal with it?"
replied Odyssean.
"Make the water pure, Naturally.
The others eyed her in disbelief. Even Odyssean had some trouble with what she'd said, but the longer he held her gaze, the more he considered the possibility.
All right.
He strode to the stream, glancing briefly at his brother, Mendel putting up a hand of warning, but Odyssean, sensing that Lilia was watching, he continued past his brother without a word. He decided he could do this for her. Each time it had been her confidence, her love, that had shown him the way. This would be no different. His fingers touched the water. Droplets fluttered over his hand as he concentrated, willing the stream to be cleaned of taint. Odyssean repeated his desire over and over in his head, until finally deciding that either he had succeeded or it had all been a waste of time. As he drew his hand back, Cerinthia asked,
But how will we know if it worked?
Once again, Lilia proved her faith in Odyssean. Without hesitation, she slipped past him and knelt by the stream. This was too much even for Odyssean.
Lilia, no!
But in one swift motion, she brought her cupped hands to her lips and drank fully the contents. Odyssean stood ready, fearful that he had failed this time and thus risked the life of the one most dear to him. To his surprise, though, it was Mendel who sought to ease his concern.
The stream, Odyssean. The stream is clear of taint now. No need to worry. I swear, brother.
Odyssean did not ask how Mendel knew this, but something in his voice made him believe.
He speaks the truth. I'm all right, my love. Trust me,
declared the noblewoman. He seized Lilia, holding her tight.
Don't ever do that again,
he whispered in her ear.
Especially not because of me.
But I knew your power protected me, protected all of us. Was I not correct?
Just don't. Well, I, for one, need a drink after that,
uttered Achilleos loudly, leading the horses forward.
As do these fine creatures.
His action brought normalcy back to the party, but as he rose from satiating his thirst, the archer suddenly looked past the stream, clearly staring at something in particular. Odyssean peered after him but saw nothing.
I'll be back shortly,
Achilleos muttered. Then the hunter darted across the stream, vanishing a moment later among the trees. Cerinthia stepped up next to Odyssean.
Should we go after him?
The farmer knew his friend too well. Even he would have been hard-pressed to keep pace with Achilleos when it came to seeking some prey in the woods.
Likely he saw some rabbit or something he wants to bring back for our dinner. Nothing to worry about. You heard him. He'll be just fine.
But it was a tense several minutes that passed before Achilleos finally reappeared. Despite the fact that surely he had run a good pace, the hunter was not winded at all. His expression, though, was anything but pleasant.
There's a town nearby. Barely an hour's pace on foot, much less that by horse.
Lilia, who had been sitting, leapt to her feet.
A town? That is not possible.
Achilleos cocked his head and glanced at the distraught noblewoman.
Not only is it possible, milady, but it's Partha.
Everyone's expression now mirrored that of Lilia.
How can that be?
Blurted Mendel.
We didn't ride in that direction. I know that, but it's definitely Partha. I spoke to one of the young locals.
At least one thing began to make sense to Odyssean.
Is that the reason you ran off? I saw a bit of movement, and I didn't want to take the chance of losing him. I thought it was a bandit, but it was only a boy. Cedric, he said his name was. He was out trying to hunt.
For the first time since his return, Achilleos allowed himself a brief smile.
And he's not bad. Took me a bit to keep on his trail. The boy is light-footed.
Paying the archer's judgment of the boy's skill no mind, Odyssean was trying to determine how the band could have possibly come around in what was nearly a circle at this point. Partha should have been far, far behind them.
Malik,
Odyssean finally muttered.
Don't you see? It has to be the high priest. It smells of some spell. Who else could it be?
Lilia joined Odyssean in his cause.
Yes, surely him. And knowing that, we must certainly not fall into his trap by going into the town. We must flee from its vicinity immediately.
But Cedric hardly seems the cleric's fool,
argued Achilleos.
And the people of Partha, they have a reputation of being good and fair folks.
It matters not what the people are like. They will be pawns for him to use against Odyssean. That is what we need to keep in mind.
Lilia insisted, and to Odyssean's surprise, Cerinthia supported the other woman.
She's right, Achilles. There's nothing natural about this turn. Malik must intend something awful,
Cerinthia said. Odyssean looked to his brother, but Mendeln was conspicuously mute on the subject. Curiously, rather than being of a mind to follow Lilia's sound advice and leave the likely trap, Odyssean found himself eager to enter Partha. If Malik did indeed mean to surprise him, he would find his supposed quarry more than willing to finish their previous encounter.
We go to Partha.
His declaration was met by a variety of expressions. Achilleos most eager, Lilia's most damning. A fire such as Odyssean had never witnessed before burned in her eyes. However, it lasted but a breath before the noblewoman caught herself. Trembling, she exhaled and nodded.
To Partha, to the edge of the abyss and beyond, so long as it's with you, my love,
Lilia said, finally smiling. He was grateful for her change of heart. Her anger had only been fear for him, Odyssean surmised. After all, it was he whom Malik desired to capture, and the high priest seemed to think the others were expendable, so he would make certain that should Malik strike again, they would be protected. Achilleos taking the lead, the five rode toward Partha, stopping just outside the edge of town. It was much larger than Sarum, or even Tullysum. For the first time ever, Odyssean beheld buildings 4 stories high, dwarfing even the barns of the wealthiest of his neighbors. Stone and wood exteriors smoothed over with plaster, roofs arched and made of wood tiles. The streets were made of stone, not mud. Wagons and horses, they clattered along the way, raising a racket akin to that of thunder. There were more people here than Odyssean had ever seen in his entire life, and they were dressed in outfits that made him feel like a beggar. Only Lilia looked at all appropriately to be seen by its inhabitants. Someone called out to them. Aware that none of them had ever been to Partha, Odyssean stiffened slightly.
"Ho there, Cedric,"
the hunter called down. He tousled the boy's mop of hair.
"I told you we'd be along soon."
And I called father, I did,
Cedric said breathlessly. Sure enough, behind the lad came an august gentleman, at least a decade older than Odyssean, and dressed in flowing brown and black robes that immediately stirred distrust in the farmer. Was Cedric's father a cleric of some sort?
"Calm yourself,"
Achilleos said quickly.
"'Tis a trader, much like Cyrus. Probably even knew him. In fact, if the boy was correct."
This them said?" asked the would-be hunter's parent. The steely-jawed figure swept back silver and black shoulder-length hair and studied the newcomers. His eyes paused on Lilia, but froze on Cerinthia.
I know you, though you'd be all grown up. You'd be Cyrus's little girl. Sarah, was it?"
Cerinthia,
she responded, her face becoming overcast. Cedric's father immediately noted this, his tone more formal. He said,
"I am sorry, lass. I shall not ask about it."
A silent Cerinthia nodded gratefully. Other townsfolk had begun to pause in the vicinity, curious about the new arrivals. Part of that curiosity clearly had to do with the man greeting them, whose status in Partha was surely prominent.
"Friends, my name is Ethan Ulgaral, and although I regret the passing of an old comrade, I heartily welcome those of kin and companionship to him."
Odyssean eyed Achilleos.
"They both seem very certain that we were coming. I took a chance that you'd say yes, that was all. When Cedric mentioned that his father was an important merchant, I used Cyrus's name. My apologies, Sari, because I recalled that he seemed to know everyone in the region who shared his trade. Cedric said that he would run and tell his father about us, and tell him what I said about the old man, and... many's a good haggle I had with Cyrus,"
threw in Master Ethan, eyes twinkling at old memories.
"Anyway, after our path led us so near, I figured destiny wants us here. Malik wants us here, Achilleos. Remember that."
"My friend," called the merchant, clearly seeking to try and prevent an argument between the two.
Is there something wrong? Nothing that can be spoken of here,
Uldyssian remarked in a low voice.
It would be best if we spoke in private, Master Ethan. Your headmen should also hear.
Well, as I am also elected leader of Partha, that shall be a simple matter to deal with. But come, who do I have the pleasure of meeting? I knew dear Cerinthia as a child, and there's no mistaking her beauty even now. You, he gestured to Uldyssian, have a vague familiarity about you. Two, but the others do not. Ethan's eyes again lingering over Lilia. Some, especially not, and I am known for my memory for faces.
I am Uldyssian Ul Diomedes.
Diomedes of Sarum, a strong-hearted, outspoken man of the earth. You look his part too. You'd be his firstborn if I'm not mistaken. Acknowledging the man's excellent memory, Uldyssian introduced Mendeln and Achilleos, then grudgingly Lilia. He expected the merchant to fawn over her, but Master Ethan simply bowed and said, By the garments and the face, you'd be from the north of the great city, yes? She dipped her head.
Yes.
Clearly, Ethan had expected more of a response, but when Lilia remained quiet, he took it in as much stride as he had with Cerinthia's silence. Well, now that we're all friends, you shall come with me to my humble home. At first, Uldyssian wanted to turn down the offer, but being that Master Ethan was both the town's most prominent citizen and its leader, there was no one better to warn concerning any possible threat to his people. Uldyssian only hoped that they wouldn't end up in a cell once he learned the truth. After all, it was they who brought the danger. As Ethan was on foot, the party dismounted, then led their horses after him. Uldyssian noticed that the people now treated the five as visiting dignitaries, bowing as they passed. Master Ethan was clearly a man that was highly respected, not only for his position, but for himself. However, the fact that this man would come without a personal guard somewhat bothered Uldyssian. Were the people of Partha that trusting? Or was there something more sinister involved? These people seemed good, honest people. Many of the people had already begun returning to their tasks, clearly not at all suspicious of the strangers. I have not been in Sarum for many years, announced Ethan as they walked through the busy streets. So how fares it? It was always a tranquil stop. I admit I used to go there in part because I savored the peaceful nature of it, as much as the heated bargaining with Master Cyrus. There was a fierce storm there recently, interjected Mendeln. Uldyssian quickly glanced at his brother, but saw that Mendeln intended no further comment. Indeed. I suppose that would be the most exciting thing to happen in Sarum, lucky for you. I love Partha, but there are so many matters to which to keep a careful eye on, you know. At times, I would have gladly exchanged places with your father, Mistress Cerinthia. Uldyssian decided to check something.
And do the clerics and the temple and the cathedral offer any help with guiding your efforts here?
Them? Ethan replied, looking over his shoulder toward Uldyssian. Hasn't been a blessed one of them in Partha for over a year. They've nothing we want. We're quite satisfied with our lot. They can save their words for someone who wants to hear them, if you'll pardon me for saying so. Uldyssian nodded in appreciation. Master Ethan's words verified what he had noted so far about Partha and its inhabitants. He saw how clean the streets were, robust men and women cheerfully going about their chores or taking a break to eat or converse with friends. Well-kept structures of both wood and rock. There was no one who was not dressed neatly, whether in simple robes or more elegant garments. It was a good town with good people. That was not to say that all was perfect in Partha. There were infirm and maimed among the inhabitants. Uldyssian saw a young boy whose left arm was a shriveled version of his right, clearly a defect at birth. An elder who hobbled along on one leg and a crutch, barely a tooth remaining. Another man who had the look of a farmer that the son of Diomedes knew so well from his own face, but bore a savage scar and across his arms and neck, likely from some accident. But none of them appeared to be shunned by their neighbors. In fact, Many had companions assisting them. Partha, under Ethan, was evidently a very tolerant town, something even Sarum could have learned from. He glanced again at the child. The poor limb reminded Odyssean of his younger sister, Amelie. In her case, it was her right arm that had been of proper length, but it had been bent back, and had always been as thin as a piece of straw. Yet Amelie had always been the most cheerful of the family, the most wanting to help. As the boy passed out of Odyssean's sight, he gritted his teeth at the bitter memory. Men like Malik walked the earth, living as lords, while children suffered because of their either a chance or some capricious spirit. Perhaps.
Mendel,
What is it? His brother said hesitantly.
here.
The older brother thrust the reins of his animal into Mendel's hands, then whirled back in the direction from which they had come. Unaware of what was taking place, Master Ethan was still pointing out Partha's landmarks. It may interest you to look up on that crested building yonder. Lilia said nothing as Odyssean passed, but he caught a smile of understanding. Cerinthia and Achilleos barely had a chance to register him before he was far beyond the party. Odyssean searched amongst the people, making the best use of his height. Finally spotting the woman and the boy, he made his way toward them. Odyssean knelt down in front of a small child, ignoring the woman.
May I see your arm, please?
With the innocence of age, the boy stretched it forward as far as it could go. However, his mother naturally looked concerned and pulled him back from the newcomer's reach. Odyssean glanced up at her.
Please, I mean no harm. My sister was like this. I won't harm him. Just let me study it for a moment.
The woman had no reason to do so, but her expression softened, and with a nod, she allowed Odyssean to examine the arm. He gently probed the arm and noticed that it was even in worse condition than his sister's had been. Thinking of Amelie again brought a sudden rush of emotion to Odyssean, that only at last did he understand that he had bottled up what was inside of him for so many years. Tears began to drown out his vision. He wished that he could have done more for his sister, for his entire family. With all the power that he seemed to wield now, he could have perhaps saved some of them from the monstrous disease. Tears drenched his face without realizing it. He kept hold of the boy's withered limb. To Odyssean, it was as if time had turned backward, and he now clutched Amelie's arm. She, of all the family, had been most mistreated by life. First, being born so, and then dying before she could even have much of a chance to experience anything. His mind filled with images of his lost sister, but with one difference. She had a healthy body now, 2 healthy arms. He imagined her catching things, or better yet, hugging him tight. Only belatedly did Odyssean sense that someone was hugging him. That feeling brought him back to the present, where he realized that it was the young boy with 2 good arms. Odyssean looked past the child to his mother. She, in turn, stared at him with an expression of disbelief. Tears ran wildly down her cheeks. Behind her, several other townsfolk had gathered, they too eyeing the farmer in astonishment. Disengaging himself from the child, Odyssean looked up at the people around him. Harsh visions of the reactions in Sarum haunted him, and he stepped back.
I didn't mean to.
But he had meant to. He had noticed the child and had been filled with a sudden desire to see if he could do for the boy what had not been possible for Amelie. As it turned out, Odyssean had been able to do just what he hoped, and now Partha, too, would turn on him, call him a sorcerer, or worse. The boy's mother lunged at him and covered the stunned farmer with kisses and hugs.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Behind her, one man in the forefront of a growing throng bowed, and another followed suit, then another, and another, and another. Someone then chose to go down on one knee, and then that became the impetus for the rest to do the same. Within a moment, everyone around Odyssean knelt before him as if he were king, or more.